In this lesson, we'll take a look at what Z-spheres are and how they can be used to create geometry within ZBrush. So a lot of the work that we do, we may bring in from other applications in the form of an OBJ or an MA file, or whatever kind of geometry we're bringing into ZBrush to begin our sculpting process. But we can also create geometry here within ZBrush. So to do that, we can use Z-spheres. So Z-spheres are going to be located here, the rest of the tools, and we can find a Z-sphere right here. It's going to be this two-tone red sphere right here. And so we'll go ahead and draw one onto our canvas. Okay, you'll immediately go into edit mode, and so we can rotate around and move around this sphere just as we would any other normal sphere. But this sphere we're not actually going to be sculpting on. We're going to be creating a network of other spheres from this sphere. So to go ahead and continue to add spheres, you can see that as I click on this sphere, selecting that sphere, and I have a little green circle showing me where the center of that is, so I can go ahead and add another sphere. Now as I do that, you can see that we have now not just the two Z-spheres, but also some link spheres linking them together and this sort of joint here. Now to move this sphere around, we can just go to Move, select the sphere, and we can move it, and you can see that the number of linking spheres changes. So as I get closer, they get further, they get fewer and fewer. As they get further away, they get there's more and more of them. Okay, we can also scale our Z-spheres if we want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple more Z-spheres here, and we can move these in different ways. If we want to make one of these link spheres into a Z-sphere, we can just go to Draw and click on that particular link sphere, and we can move that around. Okay. We can also use symmetry. So turning on symmetry will allow us to add Z-spheres, let's say, on either side of this. So we can kind of pull those out, move these down, and so we can start to create an interesting network of spheres. Now right now we can't do any sort of sculpting on this. All we can do is add Z-spheres. We can sort of come in here and rotate the chains if we want to do that, kind of rotate that up. Okay, but we're not able to do any sort of sculpting on this. Okay, so to see the kind of geometry that this Z-sphere chain is going to make, we can preview it by hitting A on our keyboard. This creates a preview of the skin that's going to be created from this, and you can see if we go to Polyframe that it's made of polygons here. Okay, and so we want to look at here is the skin subpalettes here. So right now we're looking at an adaptive skin preview. If we turn off A, we can go back and modify our skin, our Z-spheres rather, however we want to. Hitting A again will give you a preview of what that skin will look like. Okay, so if we want to maybe add another one in here, kind of scale it up a little bit, and we want to make kind of a head or something, we can start to do that, and just hitting A will allow us to preview it. Now here in version 4 there are a couple of different ways of skinning. We can go back and use the classic skinning, which will get us a little bit different look, okay, versus the new adaptive skin. And we can also choose the number of levels. If we want to have a higher density, we can change that density level to get a higher density level there. Okay, now when we want to actually create geometry from this to be able to sculpt on, instead of using the preview, we'll actually make an adaptive skin from this. So let's say that we've got our Z-sphere network set up. We'll add maybe one more in here and just kind of scale it up a bit and get kind of a bug or something like that. Okay, maybe we want to add some spheres, and you know, we're not trying to make an exact shape, but we're just trying to get a good starting point here. Okay, so let's say that we've got the starting point where we want it. To actually make that skin, we'll just simply hit Make Adaptive Skin. Okay, if we look at our Z tool, this is actually still our Z-sphere, but if we go in here to our list, we can actually see the skin that was created. We can select it, and that will replace our current tool. And this is actually a polymesh created from the Z-sphere. So now you can see we have the ability to come in and use our tools, and I've just right-clicked to bring up our brush size and everything. So we'll go ahead and just make sure that we have symmetry on, and so you can see now we can start to modify this geometry. Okay, so create our little bug or whatever it is that we're making. We can Control D to go ahead and subdivide that. Okay, maybe subdivide it a couple of times, and then we can really start to come in and start to sculpt this out. So if it's got this kind of shell, maybe a shell shape up on the head, we can start to block this in and really use our sculpting tools on this mesh. And this mesh didn't exist before we made it with Z-spheres. Maybe he has his eye is going to be sort of right down there. Okay, give him some little detail on the joints there. Coming up here and doing the same thing. Okay, and so we've been able to, just using Z-spheres, come in and create geometry that we can begin sculpting. Okay, we have a whole course just based on working with Z-spheres, so make sure to check that out, from creating models with Z-spheres to working with the skins to then sculpting the resulting geometry. So make sure to check that out. But Z-spheres are going to be a really powerful part of your workflow to actually get into creating geometry on your own. So just to give you an idea, this is actually from the Z-sphere course, and so you can see that we can just really quickly, after building up the geometry there, we were able to come in and do some sculpting and create the legs and do the sculpting on the body and the rest of the body. And that was just created with Z-spheres. Okay, so going to be a really powerful way to work. Now, just to touch on something really quickly, we can also use something called Z-sketching. So if we go ahead and start to add some Z-spheres here, and let's just add kind of an armature, and turn on our symmetry here, and we'll just add a little bit of detail here. Let's kind of move these down. So if we have our Z-sphere skeleton built up, we can actually do some sketching on this with Sketch. And to actually start to do some sketching, we'll hit Shift A, and then we can actually just draw these spheres. Just using the same hotkeys, we can kind of smooth those out and start to draw across the existing armature. So we can start to create shapes that aren't there, build out mass that's not there, kind of smooth those back in, create connections that aren't necessarily there. Okay. And then if we hit A, we're actually previewing this, in this case, as a unified skin. So unified versus adaptive skin. The unified, you can see it's a little bit more higher resolution. We're using it to kind of get the shape that we've got here. It's based on our resolution. We can take that resolution up, and it will make it look much closer to what we have there. We can take it down, and you can see how it's much more low resolution. You can see the topology there. Okay, and that's something that's fairly new as well. So make sure to check out Z-sketching. We also have a course on just getting started with that as well. Okay, so in the next lesson, let's go ahead and finish up by talking about how we can start to extend ZBrush with things like plugins and GoZ, and then working with the different alpha libraries and image libraries and things like that. So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.